Now we're going to look at writing effective supporting letters. So who can write them, how to write them, and the importance of language when writing them. You don't need to be a clinician to write a supporting letter. Anyone who knows the impact of the applicant's disability can write a letter in support. Note that Part F of the Access Request form should be completed by a doctor, which we'll cover later on. The person writing a supporting letter could be a support worker, a case manager, a nurse, a guardian, a friend, or a family member. For example, if you're working at a homeless hub, you could write a letter for someone who regularly accesses the service, explaining the impacts of their psychosocial disability based on what you've seen. Letters or reports from occupational therapists are particularly valuable in an NDIS application. It's important to make sure supporting letters are consistent with other supporting evidence. Try to cross-reference other supporting evidence where possible. When you're regularly writing supporting letters for people you support, it can be helpful for your organization to develop a suite of letter templates. There are example supporting letters on Project Embark's website, which you might like to use to help develop your template. As we've mentioned previously, it's important for all supporting documentation to be consistent. Each piece of evidence needs to focus on the primary disability. More evidence is not necessarily better. Be careful to focus on the disability rather than the circumstance, including issues that are not relevant to the primary disability. You do not need to include information about a person's experience of trauma, domestic violence, or their drug and alcohol use. If you include information about drug and alcohol use, the NDIA might think impairments are caused by the alcohol or drug issues rather than their mental health condition. And they'll require additional evidence differentiating between the impacts of their drug and alcohol use and their mental health condition.
The NDIA uses a deficit-based approach to language, so this must be mirrored when applying to access. This can be particularly difficult for people experiencing psychosocial disability and homelessness, as it can be triggering, upsetting, and demoralizing talking about one's inability to do things. To manage this, we need to be clear from the beginning that the process can be long and difficult, but remind them of the reasons why you are supporting them and the positive impact the NDIS can have on their life. 4 key phrases to become familiar with when applying for the NDIS are: a disability that is likely to be lifelong, which is the permanency of the disability needs to be evidenced in an NDIS application. Substantially reduced functional capacity, evidencing the significant impact that a person's mental health condition has on their life. Social and economic participation, showing that a person cannot properly participate in the workforce or society without support due to their disability. Reasonable and necessary supports, requesting supports that are reasonable for the disability and directly needed to help a person engage in social and economic participation. Next, we'll look at a template which gives some examples of how this language can be used when writing a supporting letter.
Using these 4 key phrases, here is a template that we've developed based on supporting letters that we've used in successful NDIS applications. Not all letters need to be structured in this way, but this gives an idea of the wording that can be used and what needs to be evidenced in a letter. This board activity also features in our video, How to Speak NDIS. Now, looking at the template, we can see that this person has a psychosocial disability that is likely to be lifelong. They cannot engage in social and economic participation without reasonable and necessary support because of their substantially reduced functional capacity due to or as a result of their symptoms. Okay, so we've had a look at the template. Some of the key points to remember are, firstly, to address the 4 phrases that we discussed. Secondly, ensure to reference the symptoms of psychosocial disability. This is particularly important as it can be difficult to perceive how someone's mental health condition impacts an individual day to day. Thirdly, use strong language such as cannot or is unable to. Using weak language can be extremely unhelpful. Lastly, Remember to describe what an individual experiences on their worst day, when they need the most support. Now, we'll make this clearer by looking at how you would write these using some examples.
So using the same template, we'll use this example of Joe, who has a physical disability. Joe has cerebral palsy, his disability, that is likely to be lifelong. He cannot engage in work being the social and economic participation we're using in this example, without a wheelchair, which is the reasonable and necessary support. Because he cannot walk, which is his substantially reduced functional capacity, due to his muscle tremors, which is the symptom preventing him from doing this. So next we'll take a look at an example of someone with a psychosocial disability.
So now we'll use this example of Shamila, who has a psychosocial disability. Shamila has schizophrenia, her diagnosis, that is likely to be lifelong. She cannot engage in social activities, which is the social and economic participation that she's restricted from, without a support worker, which is the reasonable and necessary support that she requires, because she cannot leave the house, which is the substantially reduced functional capacity, due to her paranoia being the symptom preventing her from leaving the house. As I mentioned earlier, this template is just an example of how you can use the language preferred by the NDIA when writing a supporting letter. Now that we've looked at the language to use, we're going to look at a section of a supporting letter. This is a real letter that has been changed slightly so that we can identify the strengths and weaknesses. Have a read through and try to identify some uses of weak language that could be improved on, and anywhere that strong language is used. Remember to think about whether the diagnosis is referenced, whether it talks about social and economic participation that they're restricted from, whether support requested is reasonable and necessary. Next, we'll look at the original version of this redacted letter to discuss what could be improved on. In the version we looked at previously, the diagnosis wasn't mentioned. Here we can see it highlighted in blue. In the yellow, we see the substantially reduced functional capacity that's evidenced, with the use of strong language where it says he is unable to identify and constantly neglects to attend to his basic needs. The previous version of this letter also didn't reference the specific needs that he's unable to attend to. The section highlighted in green refers to the social and economic participation that he's restricted from engaging in. This expands on the previous version, which simply stated that Branko experiences hardship, but didn't reference what this means. You can also see here highlighted in blue that the letter directly references Branko's access request form. Under types and frequencies of support, the section highlighted in yellow references the reasonable and necessary support by explaining exactly what a support worker would help Branko with. The full version of this letter is available on Embark's website, along with 2 other examples. All of these are actual supporting letters that were used in successful NDIS applications.